Rolling.
So,
Speeding.
clap for me. Perfect. And do you just want to introduce yourself, tell us who you are?
Yeah, name is John McCowchuck. I'm 42 years old, moved here to Kelowna about, a little over a year and a month ago, 13 months ago. Good at math.
If you want to just avoid looking at the camera more, look at me, kind of.
Okay, sure.
Nicer. We'll just have you redo the introduction, if that's all right.
Yeah. My name's John, John McCowchuck, heck of a last name. 43 years old, just moved here to Kelowna about 13 months ago, and I don't know, never been on camera before. It's kind of a nice thing.
And what's your occupation? What do you do?
I'm an electrician. I took a job out here, kind of moved after my dad got sick in Prince George. Grew up in BC, so I took a job out here 13 months ago and kind of took it remotely after Dad passed away. This shop actually reminds me of him quite a bit. Actually, I grew up in a wood shop, very similar to this. It's kind of like how you know you can go to someone's house and cook, and places you just know where the dishes are going to be. Well, that's what like wood shops are like.
Okay. And you've got a fun story about how you were involved with the law and the system involving digital implications. What's that about?
Yeah, it's sort of a culminating set of circumstances that just it speaks to how very little we know about our devices in terms of our identity, in terms of gossip, reputation, and legal proceedings. Essentially, what transpired was that I was taking a course at NAIT, sort of a follow-up course with my electrical trade, and I got into, I was always pretty decent at the classwork, so I got to play around with some different kinds of equipment, look at some newer technologies and stuff like that. And here we are in Alberta, right in the middle of a recession. It was shortly after, if you remember, the fire in Fort McMurray. NDP had just been elected. Province was kind of, oil prices were way down. And so it was a good time to go to school. So while I was doing that, I was just, I got into the politics of it a little bit, in terms of the energy sector and sort of being at odds with what had been my bread and butter for the 9 years before that. So I got into geothermal development. Just I'm always curious. I'm always just kind of fiddling around inventing stuff, and I kind of got popular with it a bit. And in the meantime, I was one of the last people to get a cell phone that I knew. I always worked without one, just because it's a bad idea to be distracted when your hands are around live equipment and stuff like that. So I was pretty new to that. I was never into social media or anything, but I started up a little YouTube channel called the Alberta Free Energy Association, and more than anything, it was about trying, because I just done some work out in the Fort Mac area, a place called CNRL, and there were a lot of layoffs that were happening. I know that our staff was real slow. And so I had this kind of a lot of downtime because I was still in school. I was still going to class. And a lot of the way they teach things at NAIT nowadays is essentially computer modulated learning. So I had that account, and I had, I had my bank account tied in there and stuff like that. So right during this time, my phone kind of does one of whatever phones do when they get worn out or old, but mine was fairly new. So I took it into the shop to have it serviced, and then kind of continued on without logging out of my other device. And so I was kind of walking around introducing myself to a lot of new people with this free energy thing, and found out my dad was sick at the same time. And then I've got this course, this course in school. So it was sort of a threefold kind of thing. And Dad was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and it would have been April of 2016. And I was in school. I was booked to be finished at the end of June. And I just got the phone on the 14th in 2016. So it's almost, well, it's just 3 years and a month. So what happened was I went to a place that I used to work at, a casino in Edmonton. I'd done some work. One thing that I'm as not knowledgeable as I am about, like, networks, social media, wireless devices, I'm more than an expert with things with wires in them, systems. I'd particularly done some work at this casino, and I sort of approached their surveillance department. I actually used to be a surveillance operator at the Baccarat Casino. It was the first job that I took after being a corrections officer in Prince George, small town. And so I kind of had some connections with the AGLC and with different surveillance departments, even though I hadn't been there for a while. And I was just kind of looking into those, just kind of on a lark, thinking of doing some fundraising, because it was a political time. NDP was right there. Here I am with just an idea for geothermal development using, using holes that are already there, things like glycol instead of water. Very technically oriented, but I guess the name, the Alberta Free Energy Association, just sprung up some sort of flag. And so when I went to the casino and I wrote a note, just a letter, to my old boss, who I knew all the surveillance departments, they all talk to each other, they all share files, everything like that. So I assumed that they would know who I was, even though they can see me, but I can't see them. And in the meantime, I was walking around with a cell phone that wasn't mine. So the IMEI was like a loaner device from this cell phone company. Unbeknownst to me, that sort of stuff is tracked. When someone's, whatever they do nowadays, when they run someone's name. Anyway, this telephone, just the device that I was carrying, wound up like causing some sort of alarm, concern. Whatever happens, I mean, these are community cell phones. They're like public bathrooms, right? You just never know. So this is all in hindsight. In the meantime, I'm just walking around the casino, having a good time. Dropped off my letter, played some games, and then I woke up on the curb outside in handcuffs. And when I wound up there was that the police thought that the cargo shorts that I was wearing and the phone inside of it were a weapon. They thought that the letter that I had written, that they'd intercepted, because they can do that. It's their private property, right? Even though it wasn't addressed to them, and it wasn't threatening, but they didn't know what to make of it, and I'm carrying this cell phone. But the trouble with with the identification aspect of it was that it didn't, like, no one approached me. No one said, hey, what was that note about? Can we talk to you outside for a minute? Nothing, not a word. In the meantime, they called out like APB or a dispatch to their serious incident response unit, militarized unit. And the way, like the evidence that they were going on was a note referencing this Alberta Free Energy Association and live footage of me just in the casino with over a dozen people sitting there in that surveillance room for close to 45 minutes while this team assembled. And so, unbeknownst to me, they're thinking of like a lethal, well, they executed a lethal oversight takedown, meaning right from behind, seize my arms, chokehold. They wound up, the way that I was arrested was sort of quarterbacked from the casino surveillance department, who of course don't have any sound, right? And they're switching shots all the time in much the same way that you're not. And so the way that it works is they've got all these cameras, but they've got sort of the routes program, right? So they'll alternate between one and another and another. In the meantime, these police can't get a hold of the recipient of the note, who is a RCMP member, retired sometime before that. And I reference that in the note just so that he'd remember who I was. I didn't even use my last name. I just signed it John M. And so, just because they began with sort of an intention to pursue some sort of bad scenario, they started like literally in the disclosure after the fact. The probable cause for the arrest, and this is verbatim from the police officer's own report, was that a search for John M. Yielded YouTube videos of the Sandy Hook shooting and a casino suicide at the buffet in Las Vegas. And that's on a police officer's cell phone, right? It's not even like they're searching my device. It's not consistent with the way that the night's events progressed, or the mobile team that's assembling. In the meantime, this is what is dispatched, was the officer sort of a live feed of her own whatever Google history she has. I don't know, it's not my phone. For John M. on YouTube, from a tactical surveillance / SWAT team officer. I'm not the most well versed on mobile devices, but I would think that you kind of get what you look for there. So the responding officers, and there were more than a dozen of them, were kind of stacked up around a corner while I was walking around to the bathroom. And because I surprised them, because I didn't walk back to the table that I was at, but rather kind of walked by. I stopped. I sat down. I also had in my pocket like a bulky dictaphone that I've been using during the fundraising thing for the AFEA, and it was just for pledges, right? Because we didn't want to necessarily raise any money but we were trying to like gauge interest and create a mailing list, like actual mail, right? Rather than some a website that we were trying to do, and it was just trying stuff out, right? So I had set that down along with the gaming chips on the table, and I had a runny nose. So I went to the bathroom, and it was my sort of abrupt turn, and I happened to be walking right by the area where they were hiding all behind a corner, right? Still assembling. The ambulance outside had been on standby for 40 minutes, ready for anything. But yeah, I mean, those are big boys. They're so right in the middle of a crowded casino on Thursday night, a long weekend. They plowed me right down into the floor, right through a table, right with all these cameras, based on gossip, essentially. And so I woke up on the curb. And that wasn't the end of it, though. That was the easy part, because it was sort of just an event. But the hard part was that they didn't let me go once it was verified that I didn't have a weapon, once it was sort of determined that I had no warrants for my arrest, that I actually did work at the casino surveillance. And the officer in charge, the responding officer, got to know me during a conversation. So they wound up like having to charge me with something because of and this is just what I think, right? It's all just what I think, of course, but they wound up having had invested so many resources, right? You just think of the manpower that it takes to do that, right? Between EPS, between the casino private surveillance, and between, all this video footage, between all this radio communication, between all of it. And it never came up once that no crime had even been said by anyone to have been committed. It was completely not just a mistaken arrest, but a fabricated premise for it. And so, with my having the benefit of hindsight now, I kind of look at that situation and I just see that there's no way that these public officers, who are supposed to be protecting my public safety, there's no way that any of them, when I turn around to go to the bathroom, have the same best case scenario in mind as I do, right? Like there's nobody said, hey, what's this guy done wrong? Or what's even suspicious about a note? And to go from that, sort of funneled through one in the moment situational response, and it's what they're trained for. So they didn't let me go, which really surprised me. They wound up charging me with mischief, of all things. So I'm flabbergasted at that point because I'm conscious again. I had a concussion. I've been choked out. It was, 5 grown men from behind who've been, chomping at the bit for 45 minutes to take you down, right? Like it's in the middle of a casino. So they didn't even need to do anything more than that to hold me overnight. So they did, and the next morning, a different officer comes in, like I say, it was a long weekend, so all the arresting officers had booked off. And because it was a sort of a joint response with all this manpower, they had like an independent, called a GIS investigator, handle this guy sitting in the cell. And the way they handled that was calling my mother, of all things. Not calling a casino, not assembling evidence, none of that. Call my mom. Learning through her that my dad was sick. That, you know, that I'd been, you know, just aloof. That my landlord was concerned about me because I wasn't being social, right? I wasn't going to work, right, because I was in school. I wasn't really having to work too hard at school because I was kind of doing this free energy thing. Meantime, I know my dad's got a couple of months to live, and once you know it, my favorite band, Tragically Hip's absolute favorite. Gord Downey had the same identical brain cancer as my father. Diagnosed within a couple of weeks of each other. Died within a couple of weeks of each other. And so this was sort of extracted from my mom, who gets a call from an RCMP. Shortly after, you know, I made a rush home to visit on a weekend. As soon as I got the news, right? I'd talked to my professor at NAIT, told him sort of what was going on, and then had withdrawn from that course just a couple of days before that. In fact, I was planning on going home straight away. And so they didn't let me go. They called on like a long weekend morning. They made a call to a justice of the peace with a case file against me. And they were requesting a 30-day psychiatric assessment. Not, you know, go in on weekends and talk to a counselor. They wanted a 30-day psychiatric assessment on the 4th floor of the Edmonton Remand Center for a guy that was a corrections officer. So that was the second time in 2 months that I've been arrested. First time was by the Edmonton Police Service. And it was shortly after that arrest by the Edmonton Police that my phone stopped working, that I went and got the other telephone, that I had the loaner.